What's going on, everyone? True Techno Gamer back here, and little change of pace, man. It's been a while, but we're going to talk about some gaming stuff. Yes, still passionate about gaming. Just hasn't been a whole lot of real interesting things to talk about, quite frankly. Gaming has kind of been going through a lot of changes recently, right? But this is always exciting and always just fun stuff. So if you guys have been paying attention, PlayStation 6, and there's also some stuff out there for the next Xbox. Specs have leaked. They're out there. I'm going to share them with you. And more importantly, I'm going to break them down and really translate them to what is really important about them. I think that there are some key takeaways and some things that we can bet on. But of course, at leaks at this time, take it with a grain of salt. But for fun, let's dive in. All right, so once again, thanks for checking out the channel. Please, if you haven't already, like, subscribe, hit me up in the comments. I will be in there. I do see all of it, so I appreciate the support. Appreciate you watching. Let me just set the stage a little bit for you guys. For those of you that don't know, we're going to see things change quite a bit in the next generation. There will be a next generation, first of all. That's not even a given. There will be a next generation. Nintendo just released their Switch 2. That's going to ride them out for a while. And Microsoft is working on a new Xbox console. And PlayStation is working on a PS6, basically in the next generation stuff. But it's going to look pretty different. So for this video, I'm just going to talk about the PlayStation 6 home console. Now, there are rumors, word on the street is that Sony is actually developing a next generation PlayStation handheld, as well as a PlayStation kind of like living room, home, TV box. They're kind of released around the same time and developed at the same time. And that's kind of interesting. So basically, PlayStation is looking for a hybrid model that will include their high-end home box, a kind of like a portable, think about it as a next version of Vita/PS Portal, but that will apparently have some Switch capability. So that handheld will kind of be something that you can hook up to your TV and dock it like a Switch, and be a lower powered version of a PS6, I guess, like kind of like an Xbox Series S. And then they'll have a more traditional, higher end box for the living room, right? Word on the street. I heard this enough that there's probably some credence to it. There are leaks out there for the handheld version as well. I'm just going to talk about the most recent leaks for the home box, the quote-unquote high-end, the traditional PlayStation 6 box, okay? These are leaked specs. These specs come from Moore's Law is Dead. I've talked about him before on this channel. He's pretty, at this point, well established as a insider leaker, okay? Now, I'm not just putting this out here as if it's, some far-fetched thing. He's pretty credible, okay? Now, the idea is that he probably has access to internal documents outlining the specifications for the next PlayStation in this case, right? Okay, that's fine. Keep in mind though, okay, even if these are completely credible, 100% from the source, they still are likely to change by the time the system comes out. In fact, he actually leaked some documents back in August, I think it was, right? Not too long ago. And it already, in this most recent leak, this one he did last week in September, this already has updates. It already has, changes and improvements or rather from the last documentation that he saw internally. So I expect that to happen multiple times between now and when the system comes out, okay? The other thing to keep in mind is that even if these documents are completely legit, they already are probably somewhat old. I guarantee you, Sony is having meetings every day, right? Their leadership with AMD, Mark Cerny, they're churning on this stuff every day. So there's still a lot of things that can change, a lot of things to come. The other thing is these documents give you a good overview and a good range of where they're looking at. There's still a lot of details missing, of course. There are going to be things that Sony will do with this next system, that aren't in these documents now, right? This gives us a good overview. The so-called secret sauce, which all PlayStation consoles, all consoles should have, to make it, why should you buy this box over any other box, right? We don't know what that is yet. These documents don't really allude to that yet, okay? There's going to be more stuff to come. So Grain of salt, probably outdated. Things are likely to change, but they probably do give a good indication of where Sony is heading, okay? So that said, out the way, let's just look at the specs real quick, okay? I'm just gonna look at it simple. This is a distilled version that Digital Trends put on as a screenshot from the Instagram, so we have to go and sift through a whole bunch of text, okay? This is pretty much it, okay? They're looking at an Orion APU with up to 10 Zen 6 cores. The idea is that there's going to be 8 Zen 6 cores that are used similar to PS5 and PS5 Pro. And then there's going to be 2 lower powered Zen 6 cores that are going to be dedicated to the operating system. This is a little bit further than what we've seen in PS5. PS5 has 8 cores total, 1 of which is disabled for yields, and 1.5 of which apparently is used for the operating system. So developers only have access to 5.5 of the cores, or 6, maybe 6 of the cores. In this case, developers will have access to all 8 of the main cores, and the operating system is completely separate. So that's smarter design, okay? But this isn't like some 10, core beast, right? It's still an 8-core system, which makes sense because for gaming, it's absolutely wasteful to try to think of having, even 12, 16 core, 32 core Threadripper type stuff. Games are mostly single threaded round, right? So most of the bottleneck on the CPU is still from a single thread running on a single core. Okay. So having all of these cores, doesn't do much of anything. That's why we've seen pretty much consistently now since PS4 days, that 8 cores is kind of like the magic number, right? There is some things you can do with multi-threading, within a gaming console, spread out the work a little bit, but the core game logic is single-threaded bound. So let's stick with 8. That's what we're doing. And hopefully, those 8 cores will be faster. There's Zen 6. So PS5 is Zen 2. So we're moving up 4 generations. That sounds pretty good, okay? 52 to 54 AMD CUs, this is the graphics card now, RDNA 5 GPU, okay? Delivering around 34 to 40 teraflops. Now that 34 to 40 teraflops is not dual issue, right? That's equivalent to the 10 teraflops of the PS5 and the roughly 16.7, or if you really want to be technical, 18 teraflops of the PS5 Pro, right? So you look at that, you're looking at something that is about 3.5 to 4x a base PS5, right? In terms of GPU power. Now, RDNA 5, this is a brand new architecture, wholly different design than what PS5 has in RDNA 2. They're going to be more powerful. They're going to be more efficient. So a single CU of RDNA 5 is not comparable to a single CU in RDNA 2, right? So just keep that in mind. Okay, so 52 to 54, the PS5 Pro has 60 CUs of its RDNA 2X kind of custom, CU. But it's not comparable. This is definitely going to wipe the floor with a base PS5 and a PS5 Pro, for example, especially with ray tracing, which we're going to get to in a second, okay? 2.5 to 3x faster rasterization. This is important. We got to separate rasterization and ray tracing in today's gaming world, okay? Ray tracing is the future. More and more games are going to use it. And the ray tracing performance is fundamentally different. The ray tracing path is fundamentally different. The ray tracing pipeline is fundamentally different than the raster. So when we talk about just pure raster, which is mostly going to be relevant for backwards compatibility, some new games, of course, as well, but a lot of the backwards compatibility stuff across PS4 and PS5, which you see there in the next bullet, the PS6 is looking to be about 2.5 to 3 times faster in pure rasterization. That's the number that we used to see when we went from, for example, PS3 to PS4, and Sony was touting, it was around 8x or so, 6 to 8x or so. From PS2 to PS3 and NVIDIA RSX, Sony was touting that 10x figure. That's what we're looking at. Now notice that's a lot lower than 10x, 8x, and even 6x, right? There's reasons for that because the future of gaming, it's not about rasterization. This much is true. This is not about the leak. This is definitely true. We're seeing that in the PC space. We're seeing that with AMD, NVIDIA, and Intel. Ray tracing is the future. So increasing that ray tracing power is going to give you more bang for your buck. It's going to give you more, different A/B differentiation across your games. And that's what Sony is doing. Not a mystery. It makes perfect sense. They obviously are paying attention to how the gaming industry is changing. So 2.5 to 3x rasterization is decent. Mind you, PS5 Pro is about 0.5 or 50% faster. 50% faster than the base PS5. So this is still a pretty big jump from there. This is likely to be around 2 times faster than the PS5 Pro in terms of pure raster, okay? We're talking, you know, the resolution, the frame rate for GPU bound game, being able to at least double that over the Pro and probably triple that over the base. That's what we're looking at, okay? Now, the bigger number here, the next gen increase here, the 6 to 12 times better ray tracing compared to the base. That's where the magic is. Now notice, this is a really wide range in this leak, right? We don't know. And again, don't pay attention too much to the specific numbers here. But the point is, there is going to be a much bigger uplift for ray tracing than rasterization. That's the point here. And that's, you can bet on that, I'm telling you. Okay? Much bigger uplift for ray tracing, you know, up to 12x better ray tracing than the base PS5, okay? Backwards compatibility, PS5, PS4. PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution, PSSR. There's going to be a new and improved version, of course, that will debut with the PS6. It's been long said, and we all kind of know that the PS5 Pro is basically just a test bed for PSSR. Sony's kind of trying to work out the kinks and develop it. And the real release and the real full version of that will be for PS6. So that's going to give you even more, allow developers to get more out of the GPU. So that 2.5 to 3x, you can almost look at it, PSSR, as a multiplier of that. And that's why he's saying that if you account for that, you know, now you're looking at something that's probably on the line of 4 to 8x overall than the PS5. And again, that's a pretty wide range, but that's probably reasonable. It's probably reasonable. Manufacturing rumored to start mid-2027 with a fall 2027 release. Again, absolute grain of salt there. That seems like a reasonable target. There's a lot that can happen along the way where it can get delayed and get pushed into 2028. But I would say that we shouldn't expect to see it before fall of 2027. So roughly at least 2 years out. So there you have it. Okay, that's the fundamental kind of highlights of what this leak is giving out here. Now, you may have seen some of the sensational websites out there talking about 5090 level performance and ray tracing or whatever like that. Again, they're just trying to do some really crude number crunching, looking at this 12x better ray tracing compared to the base PS5. And if you just kind of look at where a PC PS5 equivalent GPU is today with ray tracing, and you just kind of multiply that by 12, numerically, you kind of can get to roughly a 5090 level of ray tracing, or at least a 4090 level of ray tracing. That's pretty crude. There's a lot of variables in terms of actual running a game on a console, in engine, real time, with the SDKs, with the console versus PC, you know, differences, and what is the memory bandwidth going to look like, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of variables there, okay? So there is a mention that they're looking at 160-bit memory bus running at 32 GT gigatextures per second of GDDR7, and that yields about 640 gigabytes per second. A lot of people are saying that's like really, really low. It's hooked up to a memory controller that can support up to 40 gigs. They're looking at either 30 gigs or 40 gigs of RAM. So that's a pretty nice increase over the PS5 as well. I would definitely take this piece with a grain of salt. This stuff can change, and you know, you got to keep in mind that Sony, like a lot of places, they know that people are watching. They know that this stuff is likely to leak. So they probably have multiple versions of these documentation and these spec sheets that are floating around kind of intentionally to mislead people, right? They know this is going to happen. So, you know, there are probably different variations of these specs. And again, don't get caught up in the specific numbers. I also think that 640 gigabytes for next gen is kind of low, considering that the PS5 Pro already has 576. So that's a really small increase even from that. I think it will be larger ultimately. I think the 160-bit bus is kind of a weird number as well. I think we'll see something different there. So grain of salt on that end as well. Just want to put that out there, okay? Here's the deal. If you guys haven't figured this out, let me just get rid of the mystery. Let's distill it to what it is. For rasterization, the target for next gen, this is true with Xbox, the next Xbox, and Sony. They're both targeting roughly the same thing. They're just going to have different ways of getting there based on what their engineers can build on the hardware front, the costs, what they're prioritizing, what they're willing to sacrifice, etc. But they're both targeting the same rough spec. Okay, the target for rasterization is 4K 120 as a standard for running, especially for backwards compatibility, running PS5 games. So games that, generally speaking, AAA PS5 games today, generally in PS5 has at least two modes. They typically have a quality mode and a performance mode. PS5 quality mode is typically 4K 30, whether it's native 4K or upscale 4K. We're not even going to get into that, guys. If you haven't woken up and smelt the coffee in 2025, native pixels doesn't really matter. It's irrelevant. Okay, especially when you talk about AI, upscaling with DLSS, FSR, PSSR. When these things work well, they can exceed the quality of native rendering. And even when they don't work great, they still pretty much look on par to the naked eye while playing the game. It doesn't matter. Let's not even get into what the internal resolution is or whatever like that. So it's not about fake 4K. Everybody does that, by the way. People try to act like the consoles are doing fake 4K. Any game that when you use DLSS on a PC, it's the same thing. It's not a native 4K. It's not true. So that's the language that everybody's going to use from a product marketing standpoint. Sony, Microsoft, NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, they use the same language. Game developers too. When you see those PC minimum spec sheets, they say the same thing. They're like 4K, 60 output, and then they have an asterisk on the bottom. It's like with FSR3, DLSS, whatever, right? So that's the world we live in. Let's not do that, guys, okay? All right? So 4K 30, a lot of times it is native 4K, by the way, on base PS5. And then performance mode is 4K 60, usually is not native 4K on performance mode. So the target would be, for that same game, 4K 30 and 4K 60 on the base should be now 4K 60 at least on the PS6. So the quality mode, the native 4K mode, will now be 4K 60 at least in a GPU-bound scenario. And now the performance mode will be 4K 120, upscaled using a more advanced version of PSSR. Okay, that's the target. You should be. They want this system to be comfortably taking the existing PlayStation library, so PS4 and PS5 games, and 4K 120 should be standard across that. Now there's going to be new, brand new, built from the ground up, exclusive PS6 games. You can imagine that's maybe pushing the envelope, especially with ray tracing and path tracing and all that stuff. Yeah, you're not going to hit 4K 120. Okay, but for the existing games, 4K 120 is going to be the target, kind of like the baseline. Will they be pushing 8K? It doesn't make sense to right now because there's not a whole lot of TVs that can do it, but yeah, it'll be there. It'll be an option. Right now, you got to know that this new system will support the new HDMI spec, HDMI 2.2. HDMI 2.2 can technically do 4K 240 and 8K 120, right? So it'll be there in theory for, developers to unlock the frame rate and the games push beyond 120, beyond 4K 120. But that's the target, that's the baseline. That's for a console in the living room. The vast majority of TVs are going to only be limited to 4K 120. Sony knows that. Microsoft knows that. And, most console gamers are probably not going to notice or care about the difference between 120 and 240 hertz, like a lot of the esports community and PC community is, right? So that's the target, but we might see stuff get pushed beyond that, okay? Same thing is true for Xbox. So rasterization, 4K 120. If you're hitting that in the vast majority of games, especially existing games for PS5 and PS4, target met, okay? For new games, they could push for that. They might balance it out. It might be around 4K 60 or whatever, but we definitely will see a lot more 60 hertz plus games, which is hard to believe because mostly every game at least have a 60 hertz mode now. So we're going to see that continue. You see the CPU bump here. That's going to facilitate that, okay? We're not going to see a whole lot of 30, or at least games limited to 30. We're not going to see that next gen, okay? The big thing for ray tracing, the reason why they have a bigger uplift for ray tracing, 6 to 12x wide range. But the point is, the target is to be able to deliver a current existing path trace games. So think Cyberpunk path trace mode, Alan Wake 2 path trace mode, Black Myth Wukong path trace mode, Indiana Jones path trace mode, F1 25 path tracing mode, and there's a lot more to come, okay? The idea is that on these consoles, you can run those fully path trace modes at 60 FPS. Of course, with the aid of this new advanced version of PSSR. PSSR 2.0 or whatever they're going to call it, right? So that's why they need this uplift. Now, if you look at what 6 to 12X can give you, and people are looking at it and it was like, wow, that's landing around a 4090-ish, a 5090-ish. Well, that's not a coincidence. If you think about it today, if you really wanted to run Indiana Jones path trace mode, Doom, Dark Ages path tracing mode with 60 FPS, you pretty much need, right, a 4090, 5090 level GPU to do it. Even with DLSS, in many cases, even frame gen to get there, right? So, you know, AMD RDNA 5 is going to really bump up and lean heavily with the ray tracing performance. Not a mystery. They're going to do that. And as they do that, these consoles are going to be able to deliver that. And you combine that with PSSR 2 point whatever, you're going to be able to get nice high quality 4K output at 60 hertz for path tracing. Again, they're basing it on existing path tracing games because that's all they can go off of, right? There probably will be Uncharted 5, you know, with some crazy path trace engine that Naughty Dog comes up with, and it may have to run at 30 or 40, for all we know. But for existing path tracing engines that they can look at, the goal is to be able to hit 60. Microsoft has the same goal. So they need to have the memory bandwidth to support that. They need to have the amount of RAM. That's why we're seeing such a big increase in RAM to support that. They need a ton more ability to shoot more rays, right? That's what the 6 to 12X ray tracing, better ray tracing is, okay? And you need a better, faster CPU as well to handle all of that new data. That's what this is about, okay? Now, they don't talk about it here in these leaks, but the other thing is they're going to lean heavily on AI. There's going to be a lot more custom neural rendering or / AI processing in this thing. The PlayStation 5 Pro already does that. We already see a glimpse of that. There's dedicated hardware in there to run the PSSR engine, so to speak, right? We're going to see the PS6 have a lot more of that, a lot more AI and neural rendering power. How are they going to use it? Yes, it's going to run PSSR, the new version of it. The new version of PSSR, you can almost bet your bottom dollar is going to include stuff like ray reconstruction, like DLSS RR. It's going to include stuff like frame generation for sure. So there will be some form of frame generation that will be possible on those next-gen consoles. Microsoft will have a solution as well, okay? So that stuff will be there, but there's probably going to be some other surprises, some other new stuff as well that we don't know about yet in terms of how they will lean in on that neural rendering, right? But that's going to be a big part. So next generation, leaning heavily on. The big jump is the ray tracing, which will enable now real-time path tracing in the console, AI, neural rendering technologies to accelerate, right, the path tracing, accelerate the ray tracing, and a relatively modest bump. But that will get us to the final holy grail of 4K 120 as a general standard, and in some cases push even beyond that because we will have the technical infrastructure and the hardware with HDMI 2.2, new TVs coming out, probably starting next year, if not 2027, that will be able to support that new spec and push beyond 4K 120. It's not going to be very common at all, but it will technically be there. But 4K 120 will be the standard, and native 4K 60 will absolutely be a thing. That's what we're looking at, guys. That's what this all means. Don't get caught up in the numbers. Things will change to how they get there, where they want to price it. There also is a lot of word on the street that Sony is looking to make the PS6 cheaper. So they might, have to cut corners. The physical size of the machine is probably going to be smaller. The TDP is probably going to be lower. They don't want to have as expensive of a cooling solution that they needed for the PS5 to cool it down. Parts are still getting more expensive. So they want this box to be able to launch at, again, around $500, not $700-800 like the PS5 Pro did. So they are looking to scale things down a bit. So they're looking at the cheapest way that they can deliver on that promise. 4K 120, raster performance, and real-time path tracing as a reality with enhanced AI processing and neural rendering as a supplement. Now, what they do with the controller, what they do with audio, what they do with the SSD, blah, 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 we don't know. Obviously, a lot of that. They absolutely will continue with the SSD and continue with the fast IO stuff that the PS5 started for sure. How they evolve that, we don't know. Okay, so there's gonna be a lot more to come. But guys, there it is, right? I just broke it down, distilled it. That's what the takeaway is. No matter what these numbers say, what they change to, that's still the general target, right? Can they hit for as cheap as possible 4K 60 for raster, 4K 120 for raster, sorry. Real-time path tracing at 60. Those are the targets. And if you look at these specs, this can absolutely do that, right? Because again, in general, if you look at the upper end of these specs, 3 times raster, 12 times ray tracing, yeah, we're looking at something that is in the realm of a 4080-ish to a, 4080 to 5080-ish level overall with ray tracing performance that, yeah, technically in the best case scenario, we'll be pushing up there with the 4090 to 5090. So again, if you think about it today, if you want to run ND path tracing, want to run Doom path tracing, you're going to need roughly that. You're going to need about a 5080, 4090 level card. And that's what AMD's next generation is looking to do. Zen 6 cores, 8 Zen 6 cores, it's going to be able to deliver that as well. All right. So there you have it, guys. Till next one, let me know what you think in the comments. I'll keep you posted on what it develops from this, if anything does come of this. But for now, True Techno Gamer, signing off.